Here is a motion picture film. Let's tidy up this tangle of film by putting it on a reel.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Film Swap. My name is David Seeley, and my esteemed co-host is here with me again, the ecstatic gaucho himself, Mr. Jonathan Pritchard Barrett.
That's me.
Jonathan, how are you feeling? Are you feeling ecstatic?
I'm all right. I wouldn't say ecstatic.
Well, it occurred to me based on the subject that we're going to be talking about today, because over the last how long have we been doing Film Swap now? About a year and a half. And it's come to be the central focus of our relationship over the past year and a half, hasn't it?
Has indeed.
Yeah. So I kind of think sometimes I don't really just ask you how you're doing and what's going on and how things are going.
Yeah, it's I'm all right, muddling through, as we say over here on this side of the pond.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because that's an interesting response based on what we were going to talk about tonight.
Yeah.
Because what happened was I was reading an article on the Guardian website from George Monbiot. Is that
Monbiot, I think.
Yeah, and he's obviously a well-known columnist.
Yeah.
And he writes a lot about environmental issues.
Yeah.
And he was writing an article which led me to then read another article. And it was quite interesting that they, and I'm going to read this for you now, that a global survey that's called the Global Mental Wellbeing Ranking, and it actually goes throughout the world and it ranks countries based on their wellness quotient of some kind. And it said a global survey assessed mental well-being across countries, and the UK, where we live, ranked second as one of the most unhappy countries in terms of mental health. And we apparently are second only to how do you say it? Azerbaijan.
One of the stans. It's one of the stans, anyway.
Yes, and so this is quite an interesting thing that intrigued me, because one has to wonder, because obviously the UK is one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and we are supposedly have all this, that we're well developed, and we supposedly have all this this great stuff and this great economy and everything, yet we are second in the most unhappy people in the world. It says that it is Uzbekistan, and it says that 35% of Britons report feeling distressed.
Yeah.
Now, this article, this paper went on to sort of describe that they think it's more to do, because they're basing it on sort of technology and how things like social media and the internet and other things are impacting health. And they also cite sort of processed foods and things like that. Yeah. But obviously, this goes a bit deeper, doesn't it? Because a lot of people are obviously unhappy. And not that I'm sort of casting any particular light on your circumstances, but you just in your answer, because I've noticed that lately when you ask a lot of people, when you see them at work or you talk to them in the street or you meet up with friends, people tend to have those kind of responses nowadays. This kind of, I'm okay. I feel I'm all right. I'm muddling through, getting on with things. And so it's kind of interesting. And I thought it might be an interesting topic today to look at mental health.
Yes.
So what we did is we went away and we had to think about some pictures, some films that might deal with these topics. But I think before we move on to the films, there's a couple other interesting things that I wanted to point out
Yeah.
about the United Kingdom in particular.
Yeah.
It says here that poverty has increased close to pre-pandemic levels. More than 1 in 5 people in the UK were in poverty in 2021 and 22. That's 14.5 million people. And this includes 4.2 million children. And also, looking at mental health access, that over 1.5 million adults and over 500,000 children were in contact with mental health services in the United Kingdom just in March 2024 alone.
Enormous number.
Isn't that an amazing sort of statistic? Because there's clearly something going on there, isn't there?
Well, yes, but it does make me think this survey is a bit odd because the most happy country in the world, do you know what that was?
What's that?
The Dominican Republic. The country that's next to Haiti, or Haiti,
Well,
and it's a country with 30% population still living in sort of poverty, absolute poverty. So you sort of slightly wonder how much, this survey.
well, could it be though? Because I think that's what we want to talk about, is about what exactly is happiness or well-being, as people put it nowadays. Is that people in the Dominican Republic, perhaps culturally, the sort of pressures and things on them are different. And perhaps because they live in a nice sunshiny place and that they, have maybe stronger community links. And I mean, that is kind of what I thought would be interesting to explore tonight, because why is it that the UK, which is supposedly this highly developed, very rich country, why is it that people here are so unhappy, whereas in a place like the Dominican Republic, people are actually happy? So
Good question.
what is the difference there?
Yeah, I think in the survey, one of the things is that is it social cohesion or something like that
Yeah.
that they have there. It's a different society. Let's put it like that.
Yes. And so anyway, we went away and we've picked a couple of films tonight that kind of explore some of these issues, and I think it's great too because we've picked 2 films from sort of complete from countries that are on the complete different spectrum in terms of the geopolitical situation.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yes, they're sort of different perspectives looking at sort of, I guess, hardship and suffering.
Yeah, well, yeah, and the kind of the pressures and the things that the different societies put on people and how they respond to it. And so I think these 2 films actually quite go together quite well and are really quite interesting, both in terms of their differences, but also in how they explore some of the same themes and sort of demonstrate some of the same phenomenon.
Yeah, definitely. They're remarkably, they're almost like when we did American Honey and Paper Moon. There's 2 films that had uncanny similarities, which we sort of chose separately. But actually, Ken chose American Honey. But it was like, wow, this could almost be a remake of Paper Moon. And the second film in our selection could almost be sort of, in a way, it's a take on the same thing as the first one, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So did you want to jump, because I'm just assuming that we're going to go chronologically tonight?
Yes, I will. Yeah, let's go chronologically. My film is a film called Crimson Gold, and it came out in 2003. It's an Iranian film directed by Jafar Panahi, and he was the director, but it was written by Abbas Kiarostami, who is basically the sort of the biggest name in Iranian movies or art house films. Anyway, he
Mm.
is a sort of a giant, and I guess Jafar Panahi is sort of pretty big name as well.
Yes,
And
but it should be like because Iran actually has quite a great and vibrant film industry.
oh,
They
absolutely,
produce a lot of really interesting films.
yeah.
These two particular filmmakers. I mean, is it fair to say, to some extent, from the Iranian perspective, they might be considered dissidents in a sense?
Certainly, Jafar Panahi is. I would say he's definitely a dissident.
Because both of the films tonight also share in common that they are from filmmakers who are critical of their, you know,
Societies.
of their societies. Yes,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
shall I introduce the second film then,
Yeah,
just
please
to give
do.
a quick overview?
Super.
Obviously, we'll talk about it more in depth in the second half of the show.
Yep.
But tonight we're also going to talk about the great Ken Loach, perhaps one of Britain's most um, greatest filmmakers, I think.
Most
And
respected and prolific, I think. Yeah.
yeah, and it is quite a recent film of his. I don't think it's his last one because I think he's got one in since.
Mm.
But this is his sort of next to last film, and it's called "Sorry We Missed You," and
Yeah.
it's kind of an examination of the sort of gig economy and about people, what it's like for workers in modern sort of Tory Britain.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really interesting film, and it kind of very much touches on wellness and well-being.
It does. Yes.
Before we get into the films, actually, I wanted to explore this concept of well-being a little bit because I know, Jonathan, both you and I work in kind of corporate environments,
Yep.
and nowadays there is quite an emphasis on
Wellness.
wellness and mental well-being and things within workplaces, and a
Yep.
lot of that is driven by HR departments and things like that who love to kind of signpost. And but a lot of the, I don't know if you noticed, because I'm sure your company and I know many other companies that I've had experience in now, they
Yeah.
tend to put a lot of emphasis on sort of wellness apps.
We do have one of those actually. Yeah.
Yes, and a lot of times these apps, are, as I said, they just kind of signpost articles about, with pretty common sense advice about, try and keep fit, get some exercise,
Yeah.
eat proper food, talk to your friends, have a hobby, because a lot of the emphasis on these well-being apps and all these things are again about putting the emphasis, and there's things that they call resilience training and all these sorts of things that are designed to put the onus on individuals to sort themselves out when they're not well.
Yeah.
Whereas mental health, sometimes mental health issues can be exacerbated or brought on by conditions in the workplace.
Hopefully, the workplace won't be driving you sort of round the bend, much much in the way as hopefully the workplace won't be sort of have proper health and safety, and you won't have a sort of concrete slab dropped on your leg or whatever it is.
Yes, let's
Um,
hope so.
but I mean,
Yeah, but I guess maybe what I'm kind of driving at is that perhaps a lot of these things, like I discussed about some of these stats about poverty and
yeah,
about mental health crisis
yeah,
and about the situation within the healthcare services, these are things that are systemic, aren't they? And perhaps these could in part be some of the issues that are affecting people's well-being.
some of the issues, yeah, but I think it's rather a generalization to say all mental health issues are due to that. Um,
Well, I guess what I'm trying to express is my concern about the kind of commercialization of care and the emphasis on the individual rather than collectively what kind of support mechanisms and things that we can have in place
Yeah.
to have a society where 35% of the population do not feel distressed.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't imagine the workplaces that we're in these fictional workplaces in the film would offer that anyway. So yeah,
Well,
it's not like it's a plaster over something. It's not even there. It's not even an option, is it? In these two places.
well, I think, yeah, the films focus on individuals struggling within the wider context of the society, and lots of people can cope. I mean, obviously, if we have a situation where 65% of the population is okay,
Yeah,
they're muddling through and they don't feel distressed,
yeah.
and I suppose that's good. But I think it's about that 35% and about looking at how what would be a better way of supporting them.
Well, yes, exactly.
Um, so anyway, Jonathan, would you like to tell us a bit more about Crimson Gold?
Yes. So my film, as I mentioned earlier, came out in 2003. It's set in Tehran, which is the capital of Iran, and it basically starts off. I thought it was a bank job at first, a sort of chaotic bank job. But by the end of the film, I realised it wasn't a bank job; it was a different robbery. I wouldn't say it's a heist film. This is
No, no,
that's
definitely not.
well, there's a sort of attempt to rob a sort of an enterprise of some sort, and then it's sort of it's not giving too much away. You look at the Wikipedia page. Basically, this chap is there with a pistol against his head,
Mm.
and that's from the poster of the film. So that's right at the beginning of the film, and then it rewinds to sort of somewhat earlier, so you can find out how he got into this position where he's pointing a gun at himself in this bank or whatever it is. It turns out it's a jeweler shop, actually.
Mm.
Anyway, so our hero is a guy called Hussein, and he is basically, I think he's basically a pizza delivery man. He sort of drives around town on this little scooter with a box on the back, that sort of thing. And he has a sort of best friend, I guess, who is his brother or future brother-in-law, and he's sort of engaged to this young woman. And so, first of all, you see them with a handbag, and they're discussing a handbag. I'm not sure if they've stolen it or they found it.
Yeah, it's
I
it's
thought they stolen
unclear.
it.
He claims that he found it, but but then another chap approaches them, who assumes that they stole it
Yeah.
and proceeds to kind of lecture them about the honesty and integrity of thievery.
Yes, he says you got to. It's like Bob Dylan. He says you've got to be if you're going to stay outside the law, you've got to be honest.
Yes, which
And
is
so he says the same. Honesty is vital for thieves, and don't harm anybody for small change. So if you're going to do if you're going to rob
yeah.
someone, don't just take a handbag. You've got to have a
But
big.
in some way, that's a brilliant moment because it's sort of like this. It almost philosophically kind of sums up some of the context of the film in the sense that this idea that outright sort of direct theft is somehow a more honest endeavor than perhaps other sort of forms of
Yeah,
crime that are within the system, that work within the systems of government and the law and things
yeah. I
like
guess that's
that.
true. Yeah, yeah. That's a good.
Yeah, so I think that was quite. I thought that was quite brilliant, sort of
Yeah,
opening statement within the film.
yeah. No, that is a good point. And so then we go on to sort of follow him on his deliveries, basically.
Mm.
And so, first of all, he knocks on the door of this person he's delivering a pizza to, and it turns out this was his commanding officer during the Iraq War. And the guy says, "You're an angel," and gives him a sort of bit more money, gives him extra money, but then still slightly just shuts the door in his face as well. But he's sort of kind up to a point. And then the next place he goes to is basically, he's trying to deliver to this apartment block, and there's sort of the morality police are outside, which is something thankfully we don't have to deal with. So basically, because there's a party and there may be, I think, men and women dancing, something frightful like that. And so these guys are waiting downstairs to arrest everybody who comes out of the party. So he's not allowed up to deliver his pizza because he might warn them, and he's not allowed to go away because he might go and sort of phone them up or something like that. So he's just going to hang around. And
quite interestingly, though, they let other people, like cab drivers and things, go off.
Yeah. For some reason, they pick on him.
Yes.
And then I think is the next one where he ends up with the so this massive apartment, and so it's several floors, and the sort of this young I guess he's a sort of like a spoiled rich kid answers the door, and he's depressed, so he says, "Come in and we'll have a chat," and then he sort of wanders around the place. They get pissed, get drunk, and he wanders around and sort of basically falls into a depression, and then jumps into the pool, which has a swimming pool there. And then it sort of ends up with him robbing this. Oh yes, but he also wants to pay for his girlfriend's or his fiance's jewelry. So she wants this expensive Italian jewelry, and they find a receipt right at the beginning. They found a receipt, which for this Italian necklace from this jeweler's, and so this jeweler's is part of the whole plot. And first of all, they're rejected because they're too scruffy, and then they all dress up and they're allowed in, but it's sort of pretty much clear they don't have any money to buy this stuff, so they're sort of ushered out. And then the third time is what happens right at the beginning when they come in with a gun, basically. And but anyway, that's the sort of story. I think a slightly rambling synopsis, but essentially it's this man who very much at the bottom of society, and he has a very badly paid job, and he doesn't seem to have a family. He lives on his own in this sort of dark apartment, and
very small, very cramped,
tiny little apartment. Yeah.
And he's quite, because there's an implication, because he's a large man.
Yeah.
And he has a certain way about him, doesn't he, in terms of his demeanor. He's very placid, very at times he seems a bit emotionless almost, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does.
And there's an implication that he maybe was injured in the Iran-Iraq war.
Yeah, I think so. Because he says
he's because of some medication or some treatment that he's had. That's the reason for his physical state, that he's put on quite a bit of weight.
Yeah,
and he seems a bit sort of lethargic and sort of unemotional in his demeanor.
Yeah. Well, he says he's on cortisone, which is a sort of steroid, and that does make you put on weight. There's a couple of points where he's sort of like he sort of drifts off, basically. And the interesting thing about the actor, he wasn't a professional actor, and a bit like Ken Loach. Ken Loach uses non-professionals as well, doesn't he? Or sort of the hero of the next film. I think it was his first role.
Yeah.
And so the actor who plays Hussein is called Hussein himself, Hussein Emmeddine, and he was a pizza delivery man himself, and he has schizophrenia apparently. So it was quite difficult to shoot apparently because he was sort of having issues. They
Yeah.
didn't have a mental health first aider, I don't suppose.
Right. Well,
And
I'm sure they had a mental health first aider on the set.
well, but it was definitely difficult. And he, yeah, so that sort of he's not just acting;
Yeah.
he's this mental health issue is very apparent. Let's put it like that.
And the film kind of charts his kind of progress through several days and sort of demonstrates these little sort of humiliations and
Mm,
observations that he
yeah,
makes
yeah,
throughout. And he sort of, as a pizza delivery person, I mean, the film spends a lot of time with him on his bike, doesn't
it
it?
does. Yes,
Him sort of just gliding through the streets and going from place to place,
yeah,
and then having these experiences and these making these observations.
yeah.
And the film sort of just takes you through these key moments and then kind of builds back up, and it kind of goes full circle, doesn't it?
It
And it
does.
kind of ends up where it started.
Yeah,
Um, and um, the thing that you see is in his experiences in Tehran, the different social classes, where he
yeah,
goes to different types of neighborhoods. Like you say, you experience that the thing with the party, where these guys are basically um, camped outside the apartment block, and then as anyone comes out leaving the party, they arrest them.
yeah,
He also it's about the economics because, like you say, he's marrying this woman who's is a friend. It's the sister of his friend,
yeah.
and for some reason, which I wasn't quite clear on in terms of the translation that I watched, that about for some reason he was essentially doing his friend a favor by marrying this woman because she
Hmm.
was I don't know, maybe she was previously married or she was
Right.
something. I
Yeah,
wasn't quite clear on that.
yeah,
I should point out that because I watched this film on YouTube,
yeah. I watched the
and
same one.
the video that was on there was not it
Not
was not
great.
a particularly great quality
No,
presentation of the film.
the subtitles. It felt like they weren't the official subtitles, English
Yeah,
subtitles.
yeah, like they were maybe like sort of fan generated subtitles.
Yeah,
Um, so for me, sometimes there were certain points where I wasn't sure I was getting a really good representation
yeah,
of the dialogue that they were actually saying.
yeah. I agree.
So I had to then go and try and read up a bit about the film afterwards to try
Yeah,
and plug some of the gaps.
yeah,
And one other thing that struck me too was about some stylistic elements, which again I couldn't tell because if it was actual aesthetic decisions in the film
right,
that were meant to be there on purpose, or whether they were just artifacts from the poor transfer quality of the
right.
film.
Interesting. What sort of things were they?
Well, things like sometimes they would show whenever things were happening to him, like as an example, when he's in the jewelry store
Yeah,
and he's effectively being dismissed and kind of humiliated by these
yeah,
men who are running the jewelry store because they've clocked them as not having the money to actually be
yeah,
valuable customers. So they're
yeah,
kind of quite dismissive of them.
yeah.
And, they're polite, but they also, there's an undercurrent of, you really shouldn't be
Condescension.
here because yeah, you can't afford to shop here, so you really should go away and go somewhere
Exactly.
else.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, but there are certain key moments when you can kind of the background of the image kind of shifts, and I couldn't work out. And there's even times when he's on his bike and when he's driving, and his friend is saying something like they're talking about women, or
Yeah.
and then there'll be these weird shifts in the background of the image, and I couldn't work out whether that was stylistically part of the film on
Okay.
purpose or whether it was just because of the kind of the compression artifacts from the
Right.
transfer on the
Interesting.
YouTube video. I just wanted to make it clear to the listeners that if you really want to see the film, it is available on YouTube, but you might be better off searching out the DVD
Yeah.
or another way of seeing it, because the
It's not easy
quality
to
on the
see.
YouTube. Sorry?
It's not easy to see.
It isn't easy to see anymore. There is a DVD, but I almost get the impression that it might be out of print because it seemed to be quite expensive.
Yeah.
So that usually indicates that it's something where there's not many copies left lying around. So the price tends to go up.
Yeah.
There's no Blu-ray that I could see. But there is more than one person has uploaded the video to YouTube,
Right.
which, I'm not condoning or otherwise that practice or whatever. I guess that's for, other people to have the debates about,
Yeah.
intellectual property
Yeah.
rights and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We're just talking about watching the movie here. So,
Yeah.
it was there and it was available for us to watch. So we took that option.
Yeah.
But there was some, because of the poor quality of the version that was on YouTube, there that to a certain extent took away from the viewing experience.
Yes. It. Just a quick look. It looks like you can get sort of DVD, at least secondhand DVDs
Yeah,
on the internet. But I remember when I was researching it, I did see somewhere on I think it's a Criterion channel. Somebody said they should put this out on Criterion because
yeah.
it's a terrific movie and it needs to
Yeah,
be.
I definitely agree. I would love to see this treated properly. Obviously, it's a film that, when it came out, it was quite highly
Yeah,
regarded, got a good reception. But it's obviously now, since it's come out like 20 years ago now,
yeah,
it's obviously
21.
kind of fallen by the wayside a little bit.
Yeah, I
So,
went.
hopefully, perhaps our podcast here might remind a few people that this film's out there and that maybe someone else could pick it up and reissue it on
100%.
Blu-ray or something, so that there's some better copies of it out there.
Yeah, 'cause I went to see it when it was released in the cinema in
Oh, right.
UK, and I remember thinking, "Wow, that's a great film." And I enjoyed it so much because that I even remember the friend who went to see it with. I remember their comment when we sort of left the cinema. They said, "Ego-free cinema," or "ego-free," and it's an ego-free film. And I remember thinking that's quite a good description of it because it's got this sort of very dispassionate look at all these people, and
Yeah.
they're not sort of. I guess they are judged, but not in a way as well.
Mm.
And it's sort of compassionate look at everybody. Really, I guess that's the thing. Is everybody is given some given time and given sympathy. Yeah, and it's a terrific movie. Very, very sad, and it's interesting. It's quite difficult to get here because the director is sort of basically under house arrest, I think, in Iran, and he can't really make films now. In fact, one of his more recent films apparently was smuggled out of the country in a cake. A great story, and it's a shame to think, this man who's makes excellent films and it's can't be shown there. This one would have been put forward for the Oscar nomination, but it was the authorities in Iran deemed it too depressing,
Mm.
and so it didn't get the official nomination.
Yeah,
But
because it wasn't commercially distributed in Iran, so it didn't qualify as
right,
a uh, for the Oscars, I guess, because of that.
yeah. And yeah, he's been in prison, this guy, and absolutely, he's been treated very, very badly.
Mm.
So I feel like poor guy needs a break, and we should be watching his movies. and they should be more widely available.
I definitely don't disagree with that, because I think, well, I mean, we definitely should be getting an opportunity to see more Iranian films and
Yeah,
more, because I mean that's a way for people, because obviously we know about the geopolitical sort of, we read in the newspapers and
yeah,
stuff all the time about the animosities politically between our country and their country and
yeah,
United States. And but it's, I think, important that we be able to, because film is a great way to see that everybody,
yeah,
we all are the same really
yeah,
in many
definitely,
ways, and there are universal themes and things that we can all identify with and have some empathy and compassion for each other,
definitely.
and see what, that people are just like us, when no matter where they live and whatever their,
Yeah,
whatever their faith may
yeah,
be or whatever their cultural differences might be. Those kind of things are the more sort of, um, uh, films help us to look past all that and to maybe understand people a bit better. And
yes,
so I think people should definitely get to see more Iranian films. And
100%, 100%.
yeah,
Yeah,
and they do have, like, I mean, they have a very vibrant film uh, culture in Iran. I
definitely.
mean, there's lots of really wonderful films
Yeah,
that come out.
yeah.
So
Yeah, it's definitely one thing I wanted to say. A slightly different topic is this matter of the handbag. So
mm,
there's the thing I sent you earlier. So
yeah, you
basically,
sent me an article which is really interesting. And I think that's worth mentioning, because there is an element, certainly at the beginning of the film, the discussions, like we mentioned, about this chap who approaches them to talk about this handbag that they've found or stole or whatever.
yeah,
But if you want to just tell the listeners a little bit about this, the significance of handbags.
yeah. Well, I'd never heard of it before, but apparently in Iranian films, well, one of the laws of the country, like they got a sort of Hays Code, except much more extreme, is that men and women aren't allowed to touch each other in
Mm,
any respect. Even if it's not in a sort of sexual or romantic way, but in any respect. So, what the filmmakers have come up with a sort of a workaround, which is
mm,
basically having a handbag in between them, so they both touch the handbag.
mm,
Or and this little movie, about 8 minutes long, is just composed of clips from Iranian films, and it shows the sort of many ways in which handbags are used for sort of showing intimacy and touch in Iranian films, and it's fascinating. It's amazing sort of insight into handbags, and maybe that's gives this handbag at the beginning of this film extra significance. It's not just something they pinched or found, but it's actually sort of intimacy and connection with, you know, it's two blokes, so with women, but with people more generally, maybe. I don't know, but
mm,
when I saw that yesterday, I thought, wow, well, I never knew that, and that
mm.
that relates to this film as well. Yeah, and
Yeah.
of course Alfred Hitchcock loved a handbag as well.
Did he?
Lots of his films. It's one of his or one of his motifs. Appears in at least 10 of his films. These handbag scenes.
Right.
Yep.
Yes.
Google it. Alfred Hitchcock
Right.
handbags.
Okay, I will after the show. I will. Um, so in terms of Crimson Gold, before we kind of move on
Yeah,
to our second film, I just wanted to touch a bit on, because, like I said, the film kind of goes full circle in
yeah,
terms of, it starts out with, um, basically a violent crime, and
yes,
then we then go back and then see this chap, and we kind of get this snapshot of his life.
yeah,
But one of the key scenes towards the end of the film that you described was he goes to deliver a pizza
yeah,
to this uh, chap in a flat, and this flat is particularly, you know, posh, isn't it? It's
It's
like
massive.
very, it's a massive, huge, like it's a flat of someone who's conspicuously wealthy. Let's put it that way. Just
Yeah,
like, just an extraordinary place. And
yeah.
he, as someone like as we described earlier about his living conditions and his sort of social conditions, he doesn't really seem to have a lot of friends. He
Mm.
just has one friend. He's potentially going to get married to this lady, but there seems to be some obstacles in making that happen.
Yeah,
Um, he quite clearly there's a lot of alienation going on, but he shows up at this chap's flat to deliver a pizza. But apparently, this chap has just ordered the pizzas because he had a couple of lady guests over,
yes,
and they'd left the apartment before he arrived to deliver the pizzas.
yeah,
And so this chap invites him in. And he says, "Oh well, look, I'll pay for the pizzas, but I don't want them. You can have them."
yeah,
And then he kind of says, "Well, why don't you come in and we'll eat them together?" And because I want
yeah,
someone to talk to. But what struck me about this young man in this flat is that he, even though he's living in this incredibly ornate,
yeah,
very very luxurious living conditions with all everything at his beck and call,
yeah,
he's talking about feeling depressed.
yeah.
And he asked this sort of random stranger who's delivering
He's
pizzas
isolated as
and
well, isn't he?
spend time with him,
Yeah,
and because he wants someone to talk to and he wants to make some connection with somebody.
yeah,
um, so I thought that was an interesting
mm,
juxtaposition, because we have these two complete different scales economically of these
yeah,
people, yet at heart there's still unhappiness and frustration and
yeah. No, completely. Yeah, they're sort of in similar positions in a way, both sort of
mm,
isolated, lonely, depressed sort of individuals, and
mm,
sort of somewhat. Yeah, because one of them's just come back from America. This millionaire boy,
mm,
well, boy, he's like a young man, and so it feels like he doesn't know anybody maybe, and whereas this and the pizza delivery man, he works odd hours in the middle of the night and sort of doesn't seem to have any friends, and yeah, they're both similar characters,
mm,
and I think that was the thing that I liked about it, that he was the millionaire. He was treated with sort of some sort of compassion by the filmmaker. He wasn't like a monster.
mm.
He was a sort of human as well, which I thought
Yeah,
was good.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's terrific. I found this quote that on Wikipedia, an interview, the director said, "I was very conscious of not trying to play with people's emotions. We were not trying to create tear-jerking scenes." And he says, "In all my films, you never see an evil character, male or female. I believe everyone is a good person." So those things, I think those are that bit about not playing with people's emotions. I guess that's the thing about that ego-free cinema. He's just sort of presenting it as it is, and
Mm,
then not having good or bad. That's like the guy in the in the penthouse suite. Even
yeah.
he's slightly messed up as well, uh,
Mm,
which is refreshing.
yeah. And I quite like the fact that when we, how the story ends for this chap,
Yeah,
there's no real clear cut explanation for that either, is there?
no,
There's kind of no judgment or anything. It kind of leaves it to the viewer to assess all the things that we've seen and then question ourselves why he was driven to do these things at the end of the film,
yeah,
or if maybe that was inevitable from the beginning,
yeah.
or were there any direct influences that possessed him to do that?
It's very open, isn't it? 'Cause it leaves it
Yeah,
up to you, and that's one of the things I really liked about the sort of shot at the beginning or the end, basically the beginning. So the camera is pointing out of the shop and in through the sort of front door, and you see people looking in. So you see a little bit of what's in the interior of the shop, not much. Most of it's just people looking in. So it's this very unusual sort of scene where you're not really seeing what's inside. You're seeing what how the people's responses on the outside to what
Yeah.
you're not seeing inside, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Which is
Yes.
very ingenious way of portraying the scene, I thought.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's. I mean, but there's
And
lots
it's
of
one thing that people can't really do is kind of we can't see inside another person,
yeah,
and it's impossible to respond and to react to the inner workings of a person, isn't it?
yeah,
Really?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's what I remember reading an interview or something written about Abbas Kiarostami and how he has these sort of shots where there's lots of sort of empty space and there's
Mm,
bits that are missing and which you just don't get in sort of definitely Hollywood films, Western films generally. And I think that's sort of what they're sort of saying. There's this bit you can't see. There's this mystery, basically,
mm. Yeah.
which this film retains, which I think is terrific. Yeah, we should all
Mm.
watch more Iranian films. It's amazing it's taking this long, a year and a half before our first Iranian film.
That is true because there is
Madness.
a couple others that I would love to talk about, but again, it's about. I mean, there's a lot of films, isn't there? A lot of
A
things
lot
to
of
talk
films.
about,
A
a
lot of
lot of
films.
subjects, a lot of themes.
Yeah,
But
it's true.
yeah,
Yeah,
and I guess as a segue we're going to just take a little break for a few seconds,
yeah,
and then we're going to talk about our second film. But I think there's a lot of talk because this film touches on some of the aspects in Iranian society where there's we talked about the scene where there's people getting arrested because they're having a party and
yeah,
there's other things like that, but um it should be pointed out just in the pursuit of some sort of balance that in Western countries, especially nowadays, you can see a lot of examples of repression and censorship and all those things that it's always kind of taken for granted that it's always those other guys who are somehow repressing people and repressing human rights and doing all these horrible things. But
yeah.
the reality is we have those things within our own society. We have,
A certain amount.
we're propagandized all the time.
Yeah,
People get canceled and fired from their jobs because they speak out about things that they don't agree with.
yeah.
You know,
That is true.
so I think it's worth pointing out about the fact that in every place these are the kinds of things that people face in their everyday
I would say,
life, isn't it?
but big but.
Mm.
Ken Loach hasn't had to smuggle a film out of Britain in a cake, as far as I know.
No, but Ken Loach has to contend with a lot of negative press and sort of in the corporate media. He has to deal with a lot of times, issues with getting his films in front of people and getting them seen in the exact same way. It's just that the kind of the repression of certain ideas is just handled differently, isn't it? Rather than maybe overtly, it's done through commercial means or through stopping people from having access. And,
Yes.
you
Well,
know,
the interesting thing about Ken Loach, I mean, he's been making a film every 2 or 3 years for 50, 60 years or something.
yes, indeed,
And
he's been very prolific
yeah,
and it's made so many really, really great films.
yeah. I mean, his extraordinary sort of character.
So, shall we take a little break?
Let's do it.
And when we come back, we'll talk a bit more in depth about our second film, which very much at its core is
Yeah.
talking about well-being. Uh, uh, and and it's called Sorry We Missed You. So we'll be back in just mere seconds to talk about that.
Thanks for listening to the Film Swap podcast. If you like this podcast, please consider giving the show a rating or leaving a review. This helps other listeners find the show. You can follow the Film Swap on social media. We're on Twitter and TikTok at Film Swap UK, on Instagram at Film Swap Media, and on YouTube at Film Swap_podcast, and at Facebook at Film Swap the Podcast.
And we're back. Welcome back, Jonathan.
Hi there.
We are back with our with the second film in our Wellbeing double bill, where we're talking about where is well-being, and how can we get it. So, so our second film tonight, I actually went to a special screening of this, the premiere in London.
Oh yeah.
I got invited because of my union affiliations. I was invited to a special screening, and the producers were there, and they gave a little talk afterwards, and everything. It was quite interesting.
Yeah,
but I was absolutely blown away by this film.
Yeah,
it's quite powerful, and in a sense, it serves as a real companion piece to Ken Loach's previous film called I, Daniel Blake.
Yeah,
because I think they both sort of look at different sides of kind of life for, if you will, I hate this term myself, but the term working class people in the UK. But anyway, one thing that I wanted to mention, because one of my favorite authors is someone called Kurt Vonnegut, which I'm sure are very familiar with. And there was a collection of his writings that was published posthumously, called A Man Without a Country. And there was a little bit in it where he talks about community and the importance of community in terms of, how over the last sort of decades, there's this real shift in focus towards individuality and sort of, people, the individual must look after themselves. And but one thing that he talked about, he had a line in here that I thought was quite relevant to talking about Sorry We Missed You. And that he says, he's talking about the importance about how communities and small towns and stuff used to support each other. And they used to, if you had an extended family, you had lots of mechanisms of support and stuff if you had problems. And then he says nowadays, because families are more isolated, he says a husband, a wife, and some kids is not a family. It's a terribly vulnerable survival unit. And I thought that was a really good observation in relation to the film that we're talking about tonight, because Sorry We Missed You is really a film about a highly vulnerable survival unit.
Yeah, definitely.
And how they are struggling under the changes in working conditions. And how people are less and less left with choices in how they are able to cope and keep their families together and earn a living.
Well, the interesting thing is, so the last film was about a pizza delivery guy. And this one is about a parcel delivery guy.
That's right. And it's very modern because, of course, because of these developments in technology and things, we've had this ascendancy, of course, of these big tech companies. And one of them, of course, is very much, there's an emphasis on people shopping online and having things delivered. So there's been this huge, big, massive explosion the requirement for the delivery of packages and parcels to people's homes directly.
Yeah.
And what that's done is it's developed this sort of what they call a gig economy,
Yeah.
whereas people like the chap in this film who um, it's presented to him as an opportunity to run his own business, to
Yeah.
be a private contractor and be able to work for himself and be able to have his own control over his own destiny and to be able to work um, to succeed.
Yeah.
But of course, that's how it's sold to him. But in the reality of it is, he works for a larger company who completely control the basis of how he works, when he can work, how he can
Yeah.
work. And the technology keeps tabs and controls everything.
Yeah.
So that's the increasing dehumanization of that process of work, where everything is dictated by analytical statistics in on devices,
Yeah.
algorithms, and GPS coordinates, and tracking of things right from
Yeah.
step to step, uh, and how uh, this he's made to take sole responsibility for all aspects of these packages, even though he doesn't get any of the financial benefits of the success of this
No.
wider sort of boom.
Yeah.
He becomes in effect an exploited worker.
Yeah. He is very much.
And so the film sort of demonstrates that process quite like amazingly well, and it also shows the impact just on the family unit about how,
Yeah.
because of the long working hours, the low wages,
Yeah.
the stresses and strains of all that, the kind of the impact it takes on the family and on the relationships within the family.
Yeah. Well, I found online this sort of show notes or film notes from a screening at Cambridge University. I don't know if you saw that. And there's an interview with sort of Ken Loach and Paul Lavity, the writer, and the main actor as well. And I think the idea from it came, he just had this image of a house where basically the children were there, but the parents were never in because they were just
Mm.
out working all the time. That was the sort of the initial impetus for the story. Yeah, because they've got these ridiculously
Yeah, kind of the modern version of what they used to call the keyhole kids,
latchkey kids. Yeah,
latchkey kids. Yeah, this idea that the kids who are just left at home while their parents are out working long hours and
exactly,
uh,
exactly. And yeah, so this family is. Well, you better summarize it, David.
oh, well, I mean, I think basically the story is this chap, he goes out and his wife is a care worker,
Yeah,
and she sells her car in order to help him finance the purchase of a white van
yeah,
so that he can then become a private contractor at a depot that um, uh, supplies, like, sends out delivery drivers to deliver
yeah,
parcels. They're like a sort of a central depot where all the packages come in and then for the local area, and then they get sent out.
yeah,
And it basically shows what he gets himself into. He buys the van at great expense that he has to pay for. And then he has to be there at the crack of dawn to load up his truck and scan all the parcels in so that they're on the system. And then every step of the way, he's tracked and he's on a time limit about how long he has to deliver the packages. He doesn't get paid unless the packages get delivered. He takes responsibility if any of the packages get lost or damaged.
yeah,
That comes out of his wages.
yeah,
He has to pay and rent all the equipment and things that he uses, and he has to take responsibility for that if any of it gets damaged.
Yeah.
And he just ends up having to work. I think kind of it implies that he's working at least 6 days, if not 7 days a week,
Yeah.
to be able to um, bring in enough money to be able to pay for all of his obligations.
Mm.
Um, and so that's essentially what the story is about. It's just about this family and the impact that this gig economy has. And
Yeah.
it also spends a bit of time on his wife's predicament, because she's a care worker and she's now sold the car. And in her situation too, because a lot of in Britain, and I would imagine in many other kind of Western countries, a lot of the social care and health care and things have all been privatized
Yeah.
or partially privatized and contracted out to private companies.
Yeah.
And so what's happened is you have care workers who get paid very low wages, but then they're responsible for going to different. This lady is responsible for going to different elderly people's homes to
Yeah.
care for them, to go and make meals for them, help them clean up, change, and then she has to go, sometimes traveling great distances on buses to try and get to all these different places during the day. She ends up, because she's caring for somebody, there's a lot of unpredictable circumstances that might crop up because these are elderly people. Some of them might have some emotional problems, so
Yeah.
they might end up taking longer to deal with than the time that she's been allotted in her schedule. So
Yeah.
she ends up working, from, sort of really early in the morning till sometimes really late at night.
Yeah.
She sometimes gets called up to go and help somebody on a Saturday or on a Saturday night. Um, so there is this sort of demonstration about really what their lives are like.
Yeah.
And then, of course, because they're not home, they have two children, and one of them is a teenager, and he's starting to sort of play up, if you will. Um, he's starting to,
He's getting into graffiti, basically.
yeah,
He's
yeah,
going off. He's
because
going off rails, isn't he? Slightly.
he wants to express himself, and he can see, because I mean it is true that a lot of kids nowadays must look at their prospects and
Yeah.
think, gosh, what have I really got ahead of me here? I'm just going to be, I can either go to school and get myself into, I think the kid even says this at one point. He says, I can go to school and get myself sort of 50 grand into debt to get some
Yeah.
sort of a qualification so that I can end up working in a call center
Yeah.
or working, in some sort of financial administration
Yeah.
sort of scenario. And I don't want to do that. I want to, have a little bit of hope and something interesting to
Yeah.
do with my life. So it kind of really demonstrates that about the fact that this economies, the way that it's developed and the way that all these privatized things are exploiting workers, and how that actually, you know, um, impacts education and access to healthcare and all these things that are really vital
Yeah.
to people's well-being.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's a really good film. It's very sort of depressing, I would say. I mean, I guess the other film, Crimson Gold, is not exactly upbeat, but I think this one probably a bit more depressing somehow. Maybe because it's closer to home. Um, Maybe I think also that as Jafar Panahi said, he didn't want to create a tearjerker. He doesn't want to sort of manipulate people's emotions, whereas Ken Loach is very much about creating an effect and
mm,
basically getting you sort of angry and wanting to change things. So they got sort of
Yeah,
slightly
I
different.
mean, his whole film career has been like that. Obviously, his all of his films on one level or another are social critique films, aren't they?
They are, yeah,
And this one's no exception, and it's quite powerful. And I know when it came out, there was a lot of criticism about the fact that saying, "Oh, it was sort of exaggerates all these things and sort of makes out like it's so terrible." But the reality is that each and every incident in the film, they went out and researched and interviewed a lot of workers who are in these jobs
right,
and talked to them about what their experiences were,
yeah,
and sort of, that the film, so everything the film portrays is actually based on actual things that these delivery drivers have experienced.
right, yeah,
And uh, and it, and it creates a quite a powerful call for change, or for a call for re-examining about whether this is really
yeah,
uh, conducive to uh, uh, a productive, healthy society
yeah, yeah,
where everyone is sort of just expected to get on under these kind of conditions.
yeah.
Um,
That's true.
and
I mean,
so I think it's really powerful and an important film because it's quite timely. It talks about, it's in a sense kind of like a reporting on what's
yes,
happening.
yeah, yeah.
You
Well,
know,
it's interesting because it's a sort of fairly new phenomenon. Because I guess technology is the thing that, as you mentioned earlier, technology is the thing that allowed it to happen. It's
mm,
sometimes called the Uberization of employment, isn't it? So,
yes,
um, and but yeah, so he's definitely ruled by this gadget that he has to sort of swipe and people have to sign and everything like this.
yeah,
And yeah, and I think it all apparently it kicked off in 2012, 2013 when I was looking into the phenomenon.
mm,
It's been going up ever since. And I mean, I guess the from what I'd seen, it's more young people do Uberization. So I guess that's, it's I think that they said it's like 2.5% of uh, 0 hours contracts are over 25. So it's um, mostly young people basically.
mm,
But still, for his situation, yeah, and I guess up in Newcastle where the economy is not as vibrant as down south, basically. Uh, but yeah, it's a very telling insight into the whole thing. And his wife is a great character as well.
mm,
I really liked her, and she was the most extraordinarily compassionate and sort of kindly person. And
mm,
these old deers that she goes to see are great as well.
mm,
And one of my favourite scenes in the film is where she's just sort of reached rock bottom, and one of these old ladies is brushing her hair, singing her a song, "Good Night,
mm,
Irene," while she sort of sits crying. It's a very
yeah.
touching scene, very beautiful. And then the son, did slightly feel like the son was a bit annoying.
Oh
uh,
yeah, he's certainly. I mean, he's like your typical teenager in the fact that he's all idealism, but not a lot of common sense.
yeah, I guess that's it. I guess that's it.
and
Yeah,
and yeah, so there are a lot of times when you're yeah, he is being a bit of a twit in his behavior, but
yeah,
at the same time you can understand, because obviously we've been teenagers, and
yes,
you understand about when you're young and you're at that stage in your life, you just want, you want, what you kind of want for yourself is to be able to express yourself, to have lots of friends and have exciting opportunities and
yeah,
things to happen. So you want life to be exciting.
yeah.
And he's in a sense kind of rebelling against the what
Humdrum.
he can see as his future, because he can kind of look at his father and say that this is kind of the best that I can hope for,
Yeah.
or maybe not even that good, the
Yeah.
way things are going. So you can understand the frustration and the sort of the powerlessness
Mm.
that a young person could feel
Yeah.
in those situations.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of empathize with him, even though, yeah, there are times when, yeah, he is being he's being a
Dick,
bit of a twit.
basically. Yeah.
Let's be
Exactly.
honest.
Yeah.
And you can see too, like he wants to express himself, but a lot of the things that he's doing are quite, banal, really, aren't they?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it is this kind of, I mean, because when if you're talking about people expressing themselves and being creative and having that kind of energy and stuff, that all comes from education and opportunities and learning and growing and being exposed to things so that you can broaden your mind and have a bigger well to draw from
Yeah.
when you want to be creative. And so perhaps even all his artwork and stuff is indicative of the fact that kind of culturally that is being lost. Maybe that's what that is a reference to, the fact that perhaps the well that people have to draw on for inspiration is becoming more and more compressed
Mm.
and
Maybe. Yeah.
less there's less, the well is running dry, shall we say.
Yeah. Maybe that's true. Um, and well, again, another thing that this film has in common with the Crimson Gold is the getting a sort of snapshot of society through all the people you're delivering parcels to,
Mm.
which is a sort of interesting, you know, way of sort of portraying your society, basically. So some of them are nice, some of them aren't, some of them are rich, some of them are poor, and
Mm.
yeah, it's sort of
Much like the pizza delivery guy in
yeah,
Tehran, right?
exactly,
Where we
that's
are exposed to different aspects of society
exactly
through the him delivering a pizza to them.
exactly.
Mm.
Which is nice. I suppose one of the things that I found maybe a little bit sort of over the top was the boss, the evil boss, and I felt like actually basically a lot of it when there's one bit where he gives his talk. I'm the meanest so and so you'll ever meet, this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then I basically treated him as a pantomime villain. And whenever he came on, I was laughing, and
I don't
because
know.
he was just so cartoonish, and it was just
I don't know if that's true though, because I've seen people like that, and you can kind of see what he represents in the fact that he's kind of like, when he gives that speech, he's kind of saying, you know, I can see the lay of the land, I can see where things are going, and I'm positioning myself to succeed in this environment. And the way
maybe,
for me to do that is to be ruthless and to be a bit heartless and to be a bit mean,
maybe,
because in this environment, that is the only kind of way that you could possibly come out on top. Because so it is very sort of Darwinian, isn't it, in the sense of kind of this attitude of survival of the fittest, and this idea, which essentially, when you boil down to it, means I mean, that outlook kind of suggests to me this idea of just monkeys in the jungle fighting over bananas, right? And
yeah,
whoever the strongest one is, who's got the sharpest teeth and can beat the other animals over the head with a coconut or whatever, is going to be the one who comes out on top. And that is, I suppose, one way that you can approach life, I suppose. And we see that in a lot of politicians and stuff too, that is kind of the attitude, that life is this big
yes,
competition, and that we are just sort of monkeys in the jungle fighting over bananas, and I'm going to be the one to get the most bananas. And if you can't get your bananas, more fool you. You're just weak and not good enough.
maybe, but I prefer Jafar Panahi's approach that in
Mm.
my films you never see an evil character, male or female,
Yeah. Yeah.
whereas in this one you definitely do. And
Well,
you know,
well, I guess that's the point I'm trying to say. Is he evil, or is he just someone who's trying to position himself to be able to survive in such a harsh environment?
I mean, is near as evil as it gets. Let's put it like that.
Well, I'm glad that you recognize that I guess I would be a bit more charitable to him as a character in the sense that he is a human being and he's in that position where he has to make those kind of adjustments to his attitude in order to be able to succeed in what he's doing.
Maybe,
And that's not to say that I have sympathy with that outlook
yeah,
or with his his lack of empathy in things,
yeah,
but I think you can understand that it in and of itself is a byproduct of those circumstances, isn't it?
maybe.
It's
But
one
the
way
thing is,
of dealing with it. Some people like there's characters in the depot there that when they're having a problem, they come to him and they say, "Look, I need a day off because I got a problem, or somebody's broke my windshield,
yeah,
or whatever, and I have to sort it out." And he's incredibly unsympathetic.
yeah,
And the way they deal with it is to lose their temper and go, "Oh, you son of a bitch," blah 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 blah, blah, and I'll do all that
yeah,
and storm off and kind of quit or whatever. And so they end up being further disadvantaged, don't they?
yeah,
Whereas he sort of just rides it off and goes, "Yeah, whatever, mate,"
yeah,
like a lump it kind of thing.
yeah.
So,
I mean,
um,
yeah, I found it. Uh, yeah, I wouldn't say. Yeah, I'm not sure if I found him convincing, or I just found him just a bit one-dimensional, very one-dimensional, essentially.
could that be partly too? Because I mean, as you mentioned, Ken Loach tends to gravitate towards non-professional actors or actors who maybe aren't as experienced.
Yeah,
So
I think
it is possible that maybe there are some of the scenes in the film that if they had someone maybe and I don't want to disparage anyone in the film, but
so.
we're not necessarily looking at like there's not a lot of Laurence Olivier's or Robert De Niro's
No,
or
that's true. But it's the same with
anything
Prince
in
and
this
Girl Guy.
film. These are
They,
maybe actors who,
yeah,
if a more experienced actor was in those roles, that they might have elicited a bit more out of those scenes in those
I
situations.
think it was the way it was written rather than the way it was played. It just,
I think so.
yeah, it was just sort of, yeah. I mean, he was. Watching it made me think of. It's quite some Dickensian the story,
Mm,
which is good. And Charles Dickens created these extraordinary characters.
mm,
Um, but I guess, but we even with Dickens, we sort of sympathise with the baddies, and with you get a bit more of the sort of backstory or their sort of humanity. Whereas this guy,
mm.
he was just sort of cardboard cutout. I didn't really didn't didn't go beyond
Okay, well that's fair enough. I certainly um, I don't disagree with you, but I guess I'm trying to be a bit more sort of
that. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've had a lot of crap jobs, but I don't feel like I've had a boss as sort of evil as this one. If you know what I
well.
mean.
Then I guess I think you're quite lucky. You're quite fortunate because
Yeah,
they are definitely out there,
maybe.
and so but that's interesting take
Yeah, yeah.
on the character, and um, to me, you were talking about moving scenes, and I thought something that quite struck me was the bit where he takes his daughter with him on the Saturday
Yes,
to go.
that's very sweet.
Yeah, but it was also quite heartbreaking because this idea that the only way that he can get to spend any quality time with his children
Hmm.
is to take them on to work with him.
Well, I suppose so. But then, I mean, one of my neighbors, she used to do this, and she took her son around. And unlike in this film, they didn't mind her doing that. I don't think.
Yeah.
So,
But I mean, this is more like sort of it's out of necessity rather than,
yeah,
like it's one thing if you, um, take your kid to, bring your kid into work day
yeah. No,
or,
she did
just
this
on a
as well.
one
She
off,
did the
you
same
kind
thing.
of, because out of necessity, you need to, don't have any access to childcare. So you have to
Yeah,
take your kid into work with you or something. And if you're fortunate enough to have employers who are sympathetic to
yeah.
that,
Well,
um,
this was my
and
neighbor's.
that's but this was kind of a case where this was the only way that he could spend
Yeah,
time because he's him and his wife are working so many
yeah.
hours that there's no way for them to be able to spend any quality time together,
Well, that's
even
true.
when they get home from work later in the evening, and then they just fall asleep
Yeah,
on the sofa because they're so knackered.
yeah,
And it's sort of like that's kind of that heartbreaking aspect of it, is that where does it leave the kids when people are having to work so hard just to be able to provide the basics for their family,
yeah,
that they don't actually they're not able to spend any quality time together
yeah,
to actually be a family
yeah,
and to bond and spend any kind of time together,
yeah.
because he's not there out doing something enjoyable with her, like, kicking a ball around or
No,
um, doing something, whatever, some sort of fun activity, going swimming or
yeah,
going and riding their bikes in the park or anything like
yeah,
that. They're literally, he's taking her driving around in a van,
yeah.
running around delivering parcels to people. So,
That is true. But it felt like, yeah, that side of it is true. But they did seem to be having nice time together. Sort of right. He was working.
well, it demonstrated that even in those circumstances, when there's that love and the care in the
Yeah,
family, that people find a way
yeah,
to do it.
yeah. And as
Yeah.
this one of my neighbors, she used to deliver parcels. She didn't have a van. She just did it in her little car.
Yeah.
And she took her son, who's in the same year as Charlie, around with her, but they didn't. I don't think they minded because her husband was out doing his job. But yeah, this place, it felt like all the worst sort of uh, possible versions of these sort of companies were all put into one thing. Like,
Hmm.
you know, like probably most of them wouldn't have that issue. I mean, why would they? Why? What's wrong with somebody else sitting in the car with you? You often see these van drivers, and they got somebody else in the.
Well, I guess for
Oh,
insurance reasons, or sort of, they could argue
maybe.
it's just about the kind of taking the responsibility. But he does make the point when the guy says to him, "Oh, you can't do that." He's kind of, well, hey, wait a minute. I thought it was my own boss, and it's my van or
Hmm,
whatever, and it's my daughter.
yeah,
Why shouldn't I be able to do that? But
yeah,
even that, he doesn't have a choice in, because that policy is being enforced, you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
and it's the one opportunity that he had to spend some time with his daughter, and even that's been threatened by,
yeah, yeah,
you know. So you think, because it's interesting, because a lot of the criticisms towards the film that I remember reading about in
yeah,
some of the newspapers and things is exactly what you were saying, is that it was all a bit much. It was all, slapped on a bit thick and just
Well,
a little bit sort of exaggerated and over the top. But I'm
some of
not
it
sure
I
that,
did.
like I said, I'm not sure that it is, because if you read a lot about um, some of the things that was going on in warehouses,
Yeah.
And even companies like Amazon, there's like a huge battle
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
for
I
people
have,
trying to organize and unionize within these workplaces.
yeah.
And there, I mean, some of these issues are not that far-fetched at all. I don't think.
Yeah. Well, I
And
know that they had
all
the
the things
thing
in
with
the
the
film, they said
pensions,
that
didn't
I mean, obviously they've amalgamated it into one person.
they? Yeah.
So there is the aspect that, okay, maybe all of this kind of sort of stuff doesn't happen to just one guy,
Yeah.
but I think it's accumulative that
Yeah.
all of these kind of issues are real issues that really affect people. But here, what they've done is they've kind of, you know, um, brought it all together and sort of just demonstrated it in one family,
Yes. Well,
rather than trying to show 20 different guys, you know.
yeah. And I mean, it did, it's, but feel like it's like Charles Dickens or um, Les Miserables. So it's sort of making a point. So yeah,
Yeah.
as you say, it's sort of it does, it takes the worst of all these situations, and yeah. But I mean, it is it's a good film, and I'm certain that's it's there's a lot of it is true, but it just sometimes it felt like this is just it is laying it on a little thick, basically.
Well,
Because I guess even so, there's awful things happen in Charles Dickens, and we get his sort of message, but there's sort of little sort of elements of light in there as well, which I felt like this one there was no light at all.
well, you said yourself the relationship with the daughter and they did find moments within all of this darkness. They did find those little moments of light, those little moments
Well,
of
yeah,
the when they got the takeaway and they
yes,
had a bit of time, and then when the mother gets the call from the to go and help the lady, they all go together as a
yeah,
family
that's true.
and
Yeah,
drive her. So it was like,
I guess
so I wouldn't 100%
maybe
agree
there
with
are a
you that
few,
there
few
isn't
yeah, maybe a few
moments.
moments, but yeah, it just I don't know. Um, yeah, there's some bits of it I just felt like that's really is. But yeah, maybe I'm not being naive. It's difficult to know. Another thing that actually I've written down is the phone addiction of the son, which I quite like
Mm,
that element of it. I thought, yeah, that sort of that rings true.
yeah.
Definitely.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we all, to a certain extent, are, I think, a bit guilty of that. But it also shows how, yeah, those little devices have now totally, because I mean, we do everything on them. We communicate with our friends and our family. We
Yeah,
do our banking, and we do all our business, and
yeah,
all our information and everything is all run through these little devices in our pocket.
yeah,
And I mean, to a certain extent, we're all addicted to them, really. And just the reaction that the son has when it gets taken away from him,
yeah,
the massive anxiety attack that he has, when, and that's, I think, I mean, I have seen that, not too, too long ago,
yeah.
but I saw a lady who literally broke down in tears because she thought she'd lost her phone
Oh, really?
and was absolutely devastated because people have invested so much in them. I
Yeah,
think in terms of the focal point of their lives now,
true.
that the idea of being separated from them, or losing them, or having something happen is really and another underlying anxiety
And
that we have is we've become so reliant on these devices that
yeah,
it is impacting our well-being as well.
yeah, definitely, definitely. Yeah, I like that aspect of it. Yeah, it's a really good film, very powerful, and amazing to think that how Ken Loach was when he made it, so in his late 70s, maybe.
Mm.
How is he's 87? No, in his 80s. I thought maybe
Yeah.
late 70s, early 80s, which is amazing to think, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, he's now 87, and he
Yeah.
made his last film came out last year. Bloody hell,
Yeah.
he's the same age as Ridley Scott.
Yeah. They're both at it still.
Crazy. Yeah.
But yeah, I haven't seen that last one yet. And
Yeah, he was
you
82 when he
know,
made this.
yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And and I think it's important. I mean, it says it in the title, Sorry We Missed You, is about how, we need to make sure that um, in we're not overlooking everybody else, or when we're, moving
Yeah.
forward, and I think that's a key element. If you're talking about well-being, which is
Yes.
kind of the subject of the show tonight, I think both of these films demonstrate about that. Maybe we need to be a little bit more considerate
Yeah.
about how um, other people are impacted by, progress and change,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the policies and things that are enacted, and we need to make sure that we're not leaving anybody behind.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think,
Especially with this, this 0 hours contracts, it seems. Which,
yeah. Well, hopefully we'll see some changes on that, because I think it's kind of on the agenda.
yeah,
Um,
let's hope so.
but we've had a lot of setbacks here in the UK in terms of trying to move forward and improve things. But there's always a hope that
There's always hope.
things might get turned around.
Despite these films, which aren't very
Right?
hopeful, despite these films, which aren't very hopeful, there is hope.
Well, I don't know, because sometimes it's about. I mean, thank God that Ken Loach made this film and made these points,
Yeah,
because you're not going to see a film like this getting made by ITV to get screened on a Sunday night.
no,
These are the kind of things that we don't want to forget. And it's
yeah,
easy to, when people are, if things don't impact someone directly, they tend to maybe not be as interested in it than maybe they should. But I think, like Kurt Vonnegut was saying, is that really maybe we need to move back a bit more towards being a bit more community focused, and
yeah,
about thinking about how we can all support each other better, and how important things like education and healthcare, and making sure everybody's got just a basic kind of standard that they can live in,
yeah,
and be able to have a good life, and kind of thinking about what that means.
yeah,
And I think both of these films kind of draw some spotlight on that.
yeah. They
So
do. Yeah.
yeah,
Um, I guess maybe, as you were saying, it sort of shows the sort of universal nature of these issues.
yeah. I mean, that's what I like the best, because we've shown two sort of very different sort of environments in a certain sense,
Yeah.
but you can really see how things aren't really that different, are they? Really? So
No. No.
so so I think they're good two films that I think work quite well together.
They work very well together. Yeah.
The two delivery men.
The two delivery men. I, so, as I said, I feel like the most apt title would be "Delivering Depression."
Yes, we did talk. We had quite a lot of a big discussion this time about what to call the film.
Yeah.
Sorry, to call the film, to call to call this episode.
Yeah.
And um, I guess I was a bit reluctant to put depressing in the title.
Yeah, I would agree.
And I thought, the concept of well-being, like I said, is something that you hear a lot about nowadays, like that. The sort of, like I said, there's always a lot of signposting and a lot of discussions about well-being. But when you look at sort of, is our shopping discounts on an app really a way to improve people's well-being? I'm not sure they are.
Not.
Whereas if maybe they got paid a little bit better and maybe had a little bit more free time to spend with their kids.
No, they're as contract, that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so if we really want to try and improve people's well-being, are we really on the right track?
Yeah.
I guess that's the question I wanted to ask tonight on Film Swap. And now we've done that. So by all means, folks, if you have any sort of views on some of the things that we've talked about tonight or on the films that we looked at, or if you want to suggest some other interesting films about mental health issues or issues around, social mobility and or any of these other topics, by all means, we'd love to hear from you. Drop us a line, reach out to us, and let us know what you're thinking. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks. And we got some really cool guests lined up as well, coming up in the next few episodes. So by all means, folks, now would be a really great time to hit that follow button or hit that subscribe button, and keep an eye out for the next episode because it's going to be pretty awesome. All right. So, Jonathan, nice to talk to you.
Good to catch up. Great chat.
And we'll see you soon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, that's the things these nerdy middle-aged men get up to.